And then I'm going to go over so we can go live to the Facebook page. And there's a little bit of delay, so we'll give it just a second for it to load up, and then we'll get started. Okay. There we are. Okay, so we are now live over to the Facebook page. And we're live streamed. Okay, so welcome everybody. I'm going to go ahead and call the meeting to order. This is the Advisory Committee on Participatory Democracy through the Secretary of State's office. And we are happy to be meeting today because we're going to get to hear from Mark Voloshin, who is the man of the hour when it comes to knowing what's going to happen in our primary election. So the first thing I would like to do actually is I'm going to go ahead and share screen so we can go over to the agenda that was posted. And I've done a call to order. So the next thing I'd like to do is ask Gail Anderson to please do a roll call, and then we're going to do public comment. While Gail's doing the roll call, the information, if you want to do public comment, is on the share screen right now. So Gail, could you please do the roll call?
Yes, thank you. This is Gail. Carmen Abello. Carmen, are you present? Can you unmute? All right, I'll go on. I will see if we hear back from Carmen. Barbara Sagaski.
Here.
Sandra Cosgrove.
Here.
Kathleen Dickinson.
Present.
Douglas Goodman.
Here.
Jane Malorny. Kathy McAdoo.
Here.
Carmen, are you with us? Is she still on, Sandra?
I do not see her.
Okay, well, she may rejoin, let us know.
Okay.
And then Swadeep Nigam is absent excused. Thank you.
All right.
We have a quorum.
Thank you very much. So we're going to go into public comment, and I do see someone that just logged in on their phone. Oh, and there's Carmen. Let me let her back in. The person who just logged in on your phone, if you would like to do public comment, we're giving 2 minutes per person doing public comment. And so do you know how to come off mute?
Can you hear me now?
Yes.
This is Carmen. I'm sorry, I had to switch computers.
Oh, yeah. Oh, so we have you now. And so I'm not sure on the person who called in on their phone, if that person's going to do public comment. Let me ask them.
That was me.
Was that you?
The audio.
Oh, okay. All right. I just want to make sure.
Okay.
Okay. So I don't see anybody trying to call in. I don't see anybody in the waiting room. I don't see anybody doing comment. Okay. So I'm going to come back over. And we're going to go ahead and I'm going to go back over to the agenda. All right, so we are now for possible action, approval of the minutes from the advisory committee meeting on August 2nd, 2021. What I'm going to need is a motion to accept the minutes from August 2nd, 2021.
I move to accept.
And I do have a second.
I'll second it. This is Barbara Sagaski.
Second. All right, we have a motion and a second. Does anybody want to make comments, to provide any edits or suggestions for those minutes? Hearing none and seeing none. All those in favor of accepting the minutes from August 2nd, 2021 as presented, please say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed, say nay. Okay, so I am going to do a stop share. We do have a member of the public who just logged in. So I am going to go ahead and give him the opportunity to do public comment, because we all know how it's kind of nerve-wracking sometimes when you're trying to log into Zoom. So I'm going to go ahead. It's Marcos. I'm going to admit him and give him 2 minutes to do public comment. Hi, Marcos. Are you there? Let's see if we can get him unmuted. Hi, Marcos, are you there?
Yes, I am.
Yes, did you want to do public comment?
Yeah, sure. As in like introduce our organization, whatnot.
Yeah, we're doing public comment right now. So members of the public, and we're giving each person 2 minutes.
Oh, terrific. Yeah. Well, then, yeah, sure. I'll go ahead and go for it. So, excuse me, let me just move out of the light here. So, terrific. Hi, y'all. My name is Marcos Escalzi. I'm the Youth Vote Director for Turnip Activism out in Nevada and Arizona. We're an organization that is focusing on specifically on organizing high schoolers to register others to vote, to turn out the vote for the general election in November when time comes around, and in general, keep people civically engaged just in their communities in general. So, yeah, that's basically what we're out here doing. I'm happy to share. There's probably a lot of time that I need. I can share some forms in the chat as well of other ways that they can reach out to me or find someone to speak with me, connect with me to other schools or organizations doing this kind of work. Really appreciate it. Thank you so much.
Okay, so if you would like to, if you could put your information in the chat and then log out of the Zoom and go over to the Facebook page. And then when the meeting's over, you can come back in and do a second round of public comment.
Okay. Terrific.
All right, thank you.
Absolutely, thanks.
All right. So I don't see anybody else that's waiting to do public comment. So we're going to come back over and we're going to move down to agenda item number 5, a report on voter registration, party affiliation statistics, and its impact on Nevada's closed primary elections. And we've got Mr. Mark Voloshin, Deputy Secretary of State for Elections. And so I am going to turn that over to Mark and say, hey, Mark, we are so glad to see you.
Good afternoon, everybody. Thank you so much. I did just get a notice, by the way, that there was one more individual trying to make public comment just a few moments ago. I believe she's called in. I don't know if we see another number on here though or not.
Yeah, I see a number, but I don't know if that's Carmen.
Maybe Mary Janet.
No, it's not me.
Okay, so the person that just called in, if you can unmute yourself, we will absolutely give you time to do public comment. Let me see if I can help them unmute. Oh, there we go. Okay, go ahead.
Good afternoon.
Yes, we can hear you.
Okay, wonderful. Well, good afternoon, members of the committee. My name is Mary Janet Ramos, and I'm with All Voting is Local Nevada. As Nevada heads into another primary and general election, All Voting is Local Nevada applauds the Secretary of State's office for the work in the election regulations. These regulations will provide clarity and transparency to our election officials and Nevada's election system. Additionally, with the amount of changes to this year's election, we think it's imperative that this committee, the Secretary of State, and our election officials provide outreach information in multiple languages, given the diversity of our state, so that Nevada voters feel informed and confident in participating in the 2022 upcoming elections. That wraps up my comments, and thank you so much for allowing me to speak today.
Thank you so much for visiting with us. We really appreciate your public comments. Okay, so I don't see anybody else over in the participant list that's not on the committee. Mark, go ahead.
Yes, ma'am. Again, good afternoon, everybody. My name is Mark Voloshin. I'm going to go ahead. Well, first of all, I'm the Deputy Secretary of State for Elections. Just for those of you that haven't met me yet, I'm going to go ahead and share my screen, and then we'll start my presentation. Real fast, if I may. First, here we are. Does that work? Sandra, are you
Yes.
able to see the actual presentation, not the other part of it? Good.
Yes, yes. I can see
Excellent.
it.
Okay, perfect. Thank you so much. Okay, so as I said, my name is Mark Voloshin, and it's only 19 slides. I do want to preface that so nobody got nervous and had to start changing dinner plans and that sort of thing. But while it is 19 slides, I do encourage all of you, if you have any questions on what I'm going to go over today, please don't hesitate to interrupt me, raise your hand, and I'll certainly address your questions as we move forward. The topics line up directly with our agenda today. So that, again, I'm going to provide some discussion and some explanation and really a recap of the great number of things that the Office of the Secretary of State has been working on since we last talked in August, I believe it was. Okay, so to start off, I want to talk a little bit about voter registration statistics. These are the most current stats that we had, I believe, from the end of February is when I pulled them. You'll notice that there's a lot of changes, and again, to provide a little bit of additional context, There's two things I really want to highlight as part of our conversation today. Not just that we have an increase in voter registration statistics overall, an approximately 55,000 voter increase from this time last year, but also, again, there's been some unique and interesting changes in the makeup of our voters, again, over the last year. You'll notice at the bottom of the page I just added there, it popped up some additional information that captures this is pulled from the 2021 statistics, so that you're able to compare down and see the changes in party affiliation. Again, from an agency point of view, we're focused purely on enabling voters who are eligible to cast legal ballots, period. The changes in voter registration, while certainly a topic of a lot of discussion in the media, again, frankly, are neither here nor there for the Office of the Secretary of State, because we're focused on everybody, supporting everybody to make sure they can vote appropriately. Interestingly enough, that was great. Mr. Goodman, yes, please.
You're on mute, Doug.
No, I was going to say I'll get in when Mark is done with this slide.
Oh, okay. Thank you. So the interesting, one of the interesting things, rather, that I'd like to highlight is really this part here, the nonpartisan piece, right? This is extremely important and something that I want to draw your attention to, simply because we're approaching our next election, which of course is a primary. And of course, here in Nevada, we have a closed primary system. Right. So that means that major parties are going to be selecting their candidates for the general election through our closed primary system. Interesting of note, right, that again, when you look at that increase, that roughly 80,000 personnel increase in who identifies as a nonpartisan over the last year, each of those individuals, again, are only able to vote on the nonpartisan primary ballot. Of course, the major parties will get their ballots as appropriate, but that's an interesting thing that I wanted to draw your attention to, because it represents roughly a third of our state now that is unable to vote in a primary on a partisan ballot. And there's some things about that, some details that we'll discuss here in a minute in regards to changing affiliations leading up to the primary that we've got a number of calls about, and routinely around this time of year as again, we're a very transient state. When voters show up, start to ask questions, get ready for the primary, realize that they maybe are registered as an independent or a minor party. Oftentimes they want to shift to a different party affiliation to vote in that primary and then shift back. And we'll talk about that here in a little bit. Mr. Goodman.
Yeah, thank you. You know, what I always like to add when we talk about these statistics is raw numbers are nice, but when you look at the percentage of voter share, it gets even more interesting because even though, you know, for instance, we show an increase in Democratic voters, major party voters every month, their voter share goes down. So even though there's an increase, and right now, when you look at voter share, the combined total of nonpartisan and minor party voters are the largest segment, not only in Nevada as a state, but then in Clark County, in Washoe County. And then when you look at, like, for instance, the younger voters, nonpartisan by itself is the largest segment, and probably the combined total will be over 50% by the time we get to November. So I think it's always the voter share percentage is very, and for instance, right now statewide, it's almost 36.75% are not registered D or R. So that is very significant. And the Republican Party is down below 30%. So I think that just gives an overall picture where we are. And I just like to highlight the voter share numbers rather than the raw numbers. So thank you.
Excellent point, and thank you for highlighting that for sure. Okay, so why does it matter? And we talked about this, and Mr. Goodman summarized it far more eloquently than I could have, frankly, just then. So there's the first bullet point. We should have coordinated this better. Excellent. It's almost like we rehearsed it. So what when people call and say, hey, I'm interested in changing from one party affiliation to another, or ask about the primary system and find out that it's a closed primary system, one of the big questions we get is, what if I wanted to change? How can I? What's the timeline? What if I'm a new voter? I haven't registered to vote yet, but I want to soon. How soon do I have to register in order to get a mail ballot? All excellent questions. And we always point them when it comes to changes in voter registration to the single source, the website that I placed on the screen for you to see, registertovote.nv.gov. That's the location you can go to, and individuals can update their voter registration and conduct a number of other things there. For individuals who are either new to the state or updating their voter registration and are still interested in receiving a mail ballot, again, the statutes require that those individuals who update their registration up to the 14th day prior to the election are still able to receive a mail ballot. And that's something that, again, our clerks and registrars are keenly aware of, and we'll make sure that as updates occur, those individuals will be provided another ballot. This is probably the best time to mention, by the way, that if you receive one ballot and then realize that maybe you hadn't changed your party affiliation quite like you wanted to, and then change it online, another ballot will in fact show up at your residence. Some folks have called and said, wait a minute, I have 2 mail ballots. Like that's not a good thing. Again, rest assured that the election management systems used across the state are set up and designed deliberately so that when a change in a voter registration happens and a new ballot is sent, that first ballot, the barcode on that return envelope is canceled and inactivated. So even though you may have 2 ballots, this one cannot be cast. It has been canceled. The newest one that you have is the only one that's accepted. And in fact, if an individual gets nervous, and we've had that, like, which one's which, I can't recall which one's which. The primary, it's a bit more obvious, right? Because of the nature of the ballots themselves, certainly if you change your party affiliation. When in doubt, contact the clerk or registrar. They'll be able to cancel both, tell you to discard them, and then send you a new one as well. That's all, again, part of the deliberate process.
So Mark, on that, potentially though, a lot of people who move here from, say, like California, where they have an open primary and you don't have to affiliate, go do automatic voter registration at the DMV, not realizing if you're nonpartisan that you're going to be shut out of the partisan races. They could get a sample ballot and their mail-in ballot, then realize they need to change and have to get another ballot sent to them. And I'm already reading in the paper that there is a lot of paper shortage because more states are doing mail-in voting. So it would be helpful if we got the word out like now to make sure people knew to change their party affiliation before they get the first mail ballot, correct?
That's an excellent point. Yes, ma'am. Absolutely. And while we've been working closely with vendors across the state, and the counties are aware of it, and the vendors are as well, and on the national level, the post office has been involved in these discussions. The nationwide paper shortage that's occurring that you're speaking of is keen, again, very much on the radar of everybody, but you're absolutely right. The sooner you make the change, the less changes you have to make closer to the day of the election, and the better off I think collectively will be.
Mark, I just a follow-up question to that too. As when we get the calls or the questions about, can I change my party registration and vice versa, do we also let them know about same-day registration?
Yes, absolutely. By all means, again, I think they're closely interlinked, right? If an individual wants to change their voter registration, again, absolutely able to, and that can occur all the way up to the close of polls on election day. So certainly, yes, sir. It's interesting. I was thinking about this just the other day as I was reviewing the statutes, which I know is a silly question or a silly statement to say. It makes me look like a bit of a dork, but it is what it is, and I enjoy it. So there's one small sliver of people who cannot change their voter registration leading up to the primary. Any idea who I'm thinking of? Candidates for major parties, right? NRS 293-176 says specifically that you have to, if you're going to be a candidate for a major political party, you have to be that political party from December 31st till the day of the election, which means that for somebody who's an independent that may want to change to Republican or Democrat for the primary and then change back as soon as they're done, or even from a minor party is able to do that, but not somebody who's identified as a candidate, because that will instantly disqualify them for candidacy.
That's very interesting because there is this minor party candidate who I correspond with who actually asked if they could change voter registration to vote in the primary, even though they were a candidate. And the answer they came back with was yes, that they could. And so it was like, I said, well, I don't know if I would do that because it could definitely be used to challenge your candidacy, make it messy for you. But I was very surprised that, as a minor party, he could, but as a major party, he can't. Yes, sir. It was interesting.
That's exactly right. That's exactly right. So speaking of the primary and talking about candidates, again, the 2022 candidate filing period did just end last week. Again, Friday the 18th was the last day. We were trying to look for some statistics to present to you about if this was the largest pool of candidates, at least in recent memory, or how soon. Unfortunately, we were able to get quite the information I was hoping for, but we did want to highlight a couple of numbers related to candidate filing as it relates, again, specifically to our primary. You'll notice that there are 22 candidates for governor, for example. And again, this is especially interesting because when you think about the nature of our closed primaries, and this illustration I'm about to show you is really just to kind of highlight the impacts of closed primaries and why every vote counts and why it's so incredibly important to take part in every election, not just maybe the general elections of a presidential year. So in this case, after candidate filing is ended, we have 16 candidates for governor that will be on the Republican ballot during our primary. During the 2018 primary, you can see some statistics here across all parties, and during a midterm and during a primary of a midterm, generally speaking, that's when we have some of the lowest turnout rates in voter participation. During the 2018 primary, you could see it was not quite 23% voter turnout across the entire state. Specific to the Republican Party, again, the Republican Party had about 29.3% turnout of the Republican registered voters during the 2018 primary as well. And so you can see the numbers again that I pulled directly from our website relating to the 2018 primary, just to illustrate how many individuals that was. So if something similar occurs, maybe even we have almost twice that, if approximately 50% of the Republican Party turns out during the 2022 primary this year, and then recognizing that there are 16 Republican candidates, and while I'm not suggesting that it'll be an even split or even that one is again will receive more votes than another, there's a really good chance that the Republican candidate for governor may end up being selected by less than 100,000 individuals in our state out of our 1.85 million registered voters, right? So you can see again the extreme importance of every single ballot, every voice counting, in staying involved and engaged in your elections. Again, not just during a presidential year.
Yeah, Mark, I was looking at that also, and because we know in 2020 with the mail ballots, we had a little over 30% turnout in the primary, which is basically high. Do you anticipate versus 2018, where we didn't use mail ballots, do you think that the turnout will be comparative to the 2020 with the mail ballots? What do you think? Your thoughts?
It's something that we've discussed with the clerks and registrars quite a bit. And the general consensus is a solid maybe, but we just don't know, right? The 2020 election cycle was unique in so many ways. Will that continue? Will folks stay engaged? Possibly, hopefully. Will folks want to take advantage of the mail ballots to an extent? Maybe some will. Maybe some will be more reinvigorated into voting in person. But across the clerks and registrars, when we've talked about what they've heard from their electorate at the county level, there's so much, again, so many unknowns that while we certainly hope for a high turnout and we certainly encourage that level of participation, we don't know. Or maybe there's going to be kind of a post-2020 slump. Maybe some individuals that are really engaged will stay engaged, and maybe others, frankly, won't want to be engaged. So that certainly has made our planning all the more challenging, because we have to anticipate catastrophic success, right? Record turnout across the board, because if we don't anticipate and prepare for that, and we assume 30%, then we'll be caught off guard. So the approach that the clerks and registrars are taking is one where we don't know, but they're anticipating a significant turnout across the board. So this is again, something else very interesting, again, relating to our party affiliations and the voter registration statistics as we lead into the primary. These other factors that we talked about briefly already, the number of nonpartisans and minor parties, there will likely be some individuals who do same-day registration, minus, of course, like we said, our candidates for major party who are not able to do that. But the nonpartisan and minor party voters, again, it's kind of unknown if they do same-day registration changes or change for the primary. what direction they're going to change, and how that will affect the possibility of turnout and results. Again, making everyone's vote, again, all the more important. Okay, I do want to talk a little bit about some changes from the 2022 legislative session. There were numerous changes, to put it lightly, and these certainly have been at the forefront of our minds, since the session ended, in preparing not only for 22, but looking forward to 24 and even 26 in many cases. Some of the bills that were implemented were relatively quick and easy to implement. Senate Bill 84, for example, right, that adjusted the max number of individuals in a precinct from 3,000 to 5,000. The implementation really only impacted 2 counties. The 2 counties in particular were aware of it and applied those changes during redistricting at the county level. And essentially that was that. Others, like Assembly Bill 321, which of course converted our state to a vote by mail state, along with a number of other provisions. Assembly Bill 422, the mandate to transition to a top-down voter registration system from our bottom up. Assembly Bill 432, that increased the number of voter registration agencies, really in conjunction with the implementation of Assembly Bill 422. All of these different bills that we talked about during our previous committee meeting are still in most cases underway. I thought about recapping and going over each one, and then I realized we would again probably be here till about midnight. If there's questions on what we had discussed before, I have included the link to our YouTube page where we have the previous meeting. And if there are any questions at all, please don't hesitate to reach out to NBelect at sos.nb.gov, and we'll be able to provide specific details. But the bottom line is that collectively, the election officials at the state and local level have been working very hard to implement these bills, thinking very critically about ways to do it in a safe and secure manner. We've been conducting extensive research, talking to state and county officials across the country who have implemented similar type bills. And again, when we do that, to be very clear, it's not just a matter of, hey, what do you guys do over there, and we'll copy paste. We critically view everything through the lens of the needs of the Nevada electorate. While we hear what other best practices occur in other states and what some places have identified, in many cases it just wouldn't fit with what Nevadans need given our laws and regulations, or even just our population base and centers and those sorts of things. So we've been very careful but very critical in how we gather a lot of that information. Some of it in particular that we received, some ideas and feedback, we then turned into some of our proposed regulations, which we'll be talking about here in a moment. Some highlights, again, we talked about this a little bit, but just to recap, talked about the transition to mail-in ballots. That was one of the big changes. Again, they are going to all active registered voters. That question has come up a number of times. It's not all. I heard, actually, it was just yesterday, I read somebody wrote, I won't cite the source, but they said mail ballots are going to now all active and registered voters. And I was like, nope, that's not it. It's active registered. That's a specific group of people. It's not inactive, and it's not canceled voters who will be getting mail ballots. And that is for every election in which they're eligible to vote. So going forward, every primary, general, and every special type, like a recall election at the county level or statewide, mail ballots will be going out for those as well. Speaking of the mail ballots, again, there's a process, and if you're interested in not receiving a mail ballot, if you prefer to vote in person and don't want to have a mail ballot even be sent to you, by all means, please go to the link I put on the page here. If you go onto the site and log in, you're able to update and opt out of receiving a mail ballot. If you do that at least 60 days before the election, which is April 15th, you will not receive a mail ballot. If you do it April 14th or 13th, I'm sorry, April 16th or 17th, you will get a mail ballot, but the future election for the general, you will not. You'll basically be opting out of the subsequent election after this next one. But bottom line, if you go on there, it's incredibly fast, incredibly easy to do. There's a quick form that you fill out, hit a couple buttons, confirm who you are and these sorts of things. And then that information will go directly to your clerk and registrar to enable them to keep you from even getting a ballot in the first place. And that's really the key. It's not a matter of, they don't make the ballot and then the clerk gets it and like holds on to it. They take your name off of the list before it's even sent to the vendors. So there's just never a ballot made with your name and information on it.
So Mark, can I ask a quick question?
Yes, ma'am.
So if I go onto that website, I'm going to be able to do the whole process online? Because I know in the past when you wanted to opt into absentee balloting, you had to print it and then sign it and mail it. Is it now all online?
It is, absolutely. And in fact,
Awesome.
I've got a couple quick screenshots to show you exactly what we're talking about.
Awesome.
When you go onto that website, this is what it looks like. We do have the ability to print out forms if somebody would like it in Spanish or Tagalog or the English form. But if not, if you click that big blue box that says update mail ballot preference, you go to another screen that confirms your residency and other information. And when you come to this screen, that second, the top one there, I want to vote in person, is really how you're saying, I'm going to vote in person, don't send me a mail ballot. So you don't need to opt in to receiving a mail ballot, because again, pursuant to Assembly Bill 321, every active registered voter will get a mail ballot. So this is specifically an opportunity to opt out of getting a mail ballot by saying you want to vote in person. If, however, when we add these other options, because we've identified people already who have said, I want to vote in person, and then maybe something had happened, their situation had changed, maybe an injury or something along those lines, or again, whatever their situation was, they said, I think it's more convenient for me to now receive a ballot. How do I undo my opting out? So we've added that in as well. You can come in here and simply click all future elections, primary, general, or special. If there's one or the other that you're interested in receiving a mail ballot for, hit submit, and then that information will be transmitted directly to your clerk as well, without having to print anything out. Some other changes since 22, ballot drop boxes. The counties have been very, very thoughtful on how many ballot drop boxes they have available. This is something that we've also learned in our discussions from other states who have transitioned to vote by mail as well. As historically, in what has been seen in other states and jurisdictions, as you transition to vote by mail, the number of people who desire in-person voting oftentimes goes down, and the number of people who are using mail ballots goes up. As that changes, the number of in-person voting locations will eventually be reduced at the county level and based on voter needs. If that percentage doesn't change, it'll stay where it's at right now, rest assured. And we'll talk about that in a moment as well. But as, again, if more voters use the vote by mail, again, there will be a likely increased need for voter ballot drop boxes. So the counties are thinking about where they're placed, how big they are. In some cases, some counties have said, I want small ones now, but I assess in maybe the next 4 to 6 years, as more people use vote by mail, we might not need small ones, we might need medium, or we might need to go from a medium-sized one to a larger-sized one. So we've been having these discussions, including with the vendors who have said, yes, if you want to upgrade a size based on the needs of your electorate, that is possible, and there's a savings that can be incurred as well. So across the state, as the counties review what their needs are, again, the goal is to, as it currently stands, have a very high number of in-person locations, similar to what was seen in 2020, as well as a high number of ballot drop boxes as well. And then we're going to assess things going forward. What needs to change? Do we need to adjust? There are some counties, of course, right? Maybe like Esmeralda with 610 now registered voters. They might go from a small to, well, frankly, a small. They may never need to go up in size. But we are thinking very critically, county by county, on what that looks like, and again, what the needs are of each county electorate. As we get the locations, we are going to post it. That's a link there that you will see a couple times throughout this presentation today, because the information that we're going to provide, as we add to it, we're going to continue to put it onto our 2022 elections page. That makes it a one-stop shop, so that if you go on there, you'll see when the page was updated. And if it's changed since the last time you've looked, then you'll be able to see what new information is on there. And we're going to add it to the top, so that way it just keeps adding to the top so that you can see the new information. You'll notice by this point, candidate filing is inching its way down with like the documents specifically. We've removed the link, for example, for candidate filing appointments, and we've added a number of other documents on there already. And when we get this information from the counties, the specific ballot drop box locations, the polling locations, those sorts of things, the times that they're going to send out, the dates they're going to mail their ballots, all that information will be in this one single location.
So Mark, when you say a drop box, these are for people who don't put their mail-in ballot in the mail, right?
That is correct.
Okay.
You have the ability to put the mail ballot when it's sent to you. There's a return envelope, so you can put it into a mailbox and mail it away, or you can put it into a drop box, or in many cases, you can walk it into your clerk or registrar's office and hand it to the election official there.
Perfect. Thank you.
Yes, ma'am. So in-person voting, this is still an option. We continue to get questions about this as well. There's a lot of concern. Well, I thought that now that we're vote by mail, that there's just not going to be any more. And I think that's in part because, again, right, the transient nature of our state. When folks ask that, I go, where'd you live in Oregon? Because that's what they do in Oregon. There is no in-person voting. In fact, if you walk into an election official's office and say, I would like to vote in person, hand you a mail ballot, and they point at the box. It's no different there than what you would have received otherwise. But here in Nevada, it's different. We have in-person voting. We have the mail ballots. We have early voting as well. So all of those are still options. And again, the locations for those in-person voting locations will be presented at the same site.
Yeah, Mark, on the 22 election information page, that's basically we're building as a one-stop shop. Will that also have the data on my ballot was received, or is that still going to be at county level? That my mail ballot was received, counted?
Yes, so that won't be on this page. And actually, it's some interesting that you brought that up, because I was going to get to that as well. The ballot tracks program, as it was implemented in 2020, we've recognized and doing as part of our after action assessment, realized that there was a number of well, not to say hiccups, but concerns raised by voters. Bottom line is our voters have a high standard, and they wanted that process to be different than it played out. That's a process, the ballot tracks program, where recently we went to IFC and got funding specifically to pay for that process. But again, state procurement, you have to go to an RFP. There's a lengthy process. But instead of rushing that and then inadvertently going to the exact same process we had in the 2020 election cycle, we're going to holistically review it and implement it properly, with the goal being the general election. So while, again, every election is important and we want our voters to have uniform access to the same tools, regardless of the election, this is one case where if we had rushed and then done something that mirrored the same thing that happened in 2020, and maybe some of the individual frustrations that we heard about, we would not be we'd be doing a disservice really to our voters. So we're being methodical in that process and are planning on having that implemented in time for the general election.
Great, thank you.
Sure. So some clarity also, changes from 20, at least from the primary. You may remember the idea of ballot harvesting used to be illegal, is no longer illegal under Assembly Bill 321. So now, again, voters are able to give their ballot to an authorized person to return that ballot to the clerk or to a ballot drop box. Very similar to what we talked about before. This is something that we haven't gotten too many questions about, but again, there's some key parts of Assembly Bill 321 that we need to highlight because there are timing considerations. A couple of groups have reached out and said, we're thinking about maybe having a ballot drop box, not an official one, of course, because the statutes say that official drop boxes are placed by the county election officials, but an unofficial one, maybe at my community center or something along those lines. And we point them right towards the statutes and make sure that they understand that there is a timing, a receipt requirement that they need to be aware of. If you hand your ballot to somebody, they've got 3 days after receipt to have that ballot turned in to the county election official. Again, especially if it's 4 more days before the election, but if it's not, if it's closer, they've got to do it before the day of the election. There is a penalty associated with individuals who violate that. The bottom line, though, again, right? We have so many opportunities available. You can vote in person. You can vote by mail on your own. If you're uncomfortable giving your ballot to somebody, then I recommend you not do it and simply either put it into the mail or bring it to the clerk yourself to risk any concerns about ballot harvesting.
Mark,
Yes, ma'am.
wanted to ask you, because I am sure people are thinking that, who is an authorized person to give your ballot to?
Yes, ma'am. So an authorized person, again, it doesn't specify that it has to be in writing. In many cases, the authorized person could be your spouse. It ultimately is somebody that you say, I am handing my ballot to you to return to the county clerk or registrar. I am authorizing you to carry it. But you're right. And Secretary, I remember our attempted emergency regulations trying to capture who these individuals were. just by a statement so that we were aware of who was collecting ballots. But that is a concern going forward.
Thank you.
Yes, ma'am. Election returns. There are some changes in the election returns as well. The timelines, again, it was one way in the primary, it changed for the general, and it has since changed again. Assembly Bill 321 went into effect on January 1st of 22. So again, from now on, for now, these are the timelines. And again, this is extremely important to know as well, and also something that you want to make sure when people ask that they're very clear on, because there were changes before. This is how it is now, though. And again, also pursuant to Assembly Bill 321. Mail ballots that are mailed and date marked or postmarked by election day, the county clerks and registrars have 4 days afterwards to receive that mail ballot. After those 4 days, no mail ballot will be considered timely. They have 2 additional days after the receipt of those mail ballots to continue doing the signature curing process. So that's ultimately 6 days past the election for signature curing. And again, that process includes when a ballot is arrived by a clerk or received by a clerk or registrar, they look at the signature and compare it to what's on the voter registration database. If there's any question at all, then they reach out and notify the voter. We got a ballot from you. We need to talk to you. Is this your ballot? To confirm that it was yours. That's the curing process, and that can occur up to the 6th day following an election. Provisional ballots, once all of that has occurred, and this is an important step in the process as well, after that 6th day, all of the counties in the state will review their provisional ballots to make sure that they basically what happens is they notify the Secretary of State, here are the provisional ballots we have. We compare them at a state level to make sure that these provisional ballots, that there's no duplicate names, no individuals trying to pull a fast one and vote in Story, Carson, Douglas, and Washoe. And we validate that there's no duplicates as well as their eligibility. Again, the Help America Vote Act requires that if somebody shows up to the polls and says, I'm an eligible voter, I want to vote, and if the clerk says, well, you're not on our polls, they're required by law to give the individual a provisional ballot. Doesn't mean that it's counted until after that individual's eligibility has been verified. But again, this provisional ballot process is an important one, and that comparison has to happen before we're able to certify at the county level. The county commissioners then have to canvass the returns on or before the 10th day. So really, again, given what we just discussed, it's really kind of the end of the 7th day is the earliest that the county commissioners can certify it, all the way up to the 10th day after the election. Election regulations. A little bit of discussion now about our election regulations that we've been working on so hard and that we were able to finalize just less than a month ago. So in January of 21, one of the things we began reviewing was our election regulations. And I'm talking specifically, of course, about the Nevada Administrative Code, chapters that relate specifically to the 9 chapters of our revised statutes that make up Title 24. We did a holistic review starting in January of 21, top to bottom of all of our regulations, looking to see which ones need updating. Then, of course, the legislative session occurred, and then we added that into our regulatory review, identifying which regulations need to be created or revised based on new legislation. And then ultimately, we came out with, it was about 160 or so pages initially of proposed regulations. Some of these were very, very minor changes, updates to the dates, just so that voters that had questions on timelines relating to specific elections wouldn't have to kind of count the math of how many 6-year terms and that sort of thing. So some were very, very minor. Others were focused on providing increased clarity to the clerks and registrars, talking about reporting requirements, talking about meaningful observation and what exactly the scope of their abilities are during the conduct of an election. And then others, in a very important aspect, was focused on increasing public visibility. And we wanted the public to be able to look at the statutes And if there were any questions in the statutes, then look at the regulations. And if those regulations weren't clear and there was a transparency issue or a lack of understanding, we really wanted to address and increase that to the best of our ability. And this is something that, again, wasn't just the secretary and the elections division pushing. The clerks and registrars were fully on board and wanted the same thing. They want public visibility. They want involvement in these processes, and they want the public to understand that again, we don't make things up on the fly. We simply follow the laws. That's all it comes down to. So we worked hard collectively on these regulations. They ultimately, we had some went to workshops and adoption hearings early in 22, and then it culminated with a trip to Legislative Commission on February 28th at the end of last month. They ultimately cover 5 chapters, and when I talk about there being 31 separate regulations, we originally had them grouped into just 5 regulations based on the chapter, but we realized that at the end of the day, while it was certainly a little bit more administratively intense for us, the right answer for the legislators and for a number of other folks, certainly the public as well, was really to break them up into a number of regulations by topic in many cases, or kind of subject matter. By doing so, it allowed a precise focus for feedback. Instead of saying out of your 5 regulations, well, parts of this one I like, but parts of it I don't, but I can't really tell you which parts I do or don't. Now we said, well, there's 31 of them. Which aspects of these? And I think that really helped with our involvement and discussion with the public, where folks were able to say, I really like this one over here, not so much this one over here. And it allowed, again, while it was administratively intense, it allowed a greater level of discussion and clarity on the regulations. Ultimately, one of the regulations that we had proposed upon further discussion with the clerks, registrars, with some folks at LCB and our legal team, we ultimately decided to make a recommendation to the secretary not to adopt this one, because really we need to keep considering it and to see what sort of lessons learned will occur in the 2022 election cycle. 2 of them were not accepted by the Legislative Commission. One of the 2 was related to repealing regulations that were related to absent ballots, with the idea being that if Assembly Bill 321 is modified or maybe repealed during the next legislative session, these regulations would still be in place. And then the other one that was not accepted by the Legislative Commission related to details on signature verification training. Signature verification training is something that's required pursuant to Assembly Bill 321. But ultimately, again, that process will still occur, but we're just simply going to reconsider the tone and description in those regulations and possibly revisit them going forward. But the 28 regulations were adopted and ultimately approved. And we have the link here as well. We've included the link to all the workshops and regulation and adoption hearing videos. We've got the links to the original notices, as well as the link to the Legislative Commission and the final wording of the adopted regulations as well. So again, the goal is transparency. The goal is making sure that the public is aware of this process and what was going on and why they were going on. Again, again, I think overall it was certainly an educational experience for me.
Mark, the failure of the Legislative Commission to adopt the signature verification regulation, does that mean that the forensic training that was part of 321 will not be conducted?
No, sir. That training will still be conducted. The regulations were simply to provide additional clarity, and that's the part that, again, we're going to revisit going forward.
Okay, thank you.
Sure. So some of these regulations, and again, I thought about having some extreme detail, but I realized that I would very easily turn this into a 6-hour meeting, and then I think maybe you all wouldn't want to talk to me ever again. So I provided those links to the videos. If you have questions, by all means. But here are some highlights that I wanted to talk about. So some of the regulations, again, one of them in particular, focused on Assembly Bill 121. This was Assemblywoman Cohen's bill that authorized and codified the use of ease by members of the disabled community. Assembly Bill 121, this regulation in particular, lays out a series of explanations and considerations, timelines, and reporting requirements, really just describing how that implementation will occur. We've updated ballot Dropbox guidance, including, this was some of the things that we heard about from other states that they highlighted, because when we did talk to other states about transitioning to a vote by mail process, the question wasn't just like, tell me what you think we should know. It was really more, my question was focused on, what did you learn after 4 or 5 years of being a vote by mail state that you wished you knew up front? What sort of lessons learned do you think we are going to have in 5 to 10 years that we'll look back on and go, if we've been told that up front, our electorate would have been better supported. Some of these in particular, the idea of a unique identifier on ballot drop boxes. One of the states told us, and sure enough, we saw this in 2020. If you don't have unique identifiers on the boxes, here's what happens. Someone grabs their phone. Hey, I just wanted to report one of the boxes. I saw it a minute ago. It's full, I think. I couldn't tell. Yeah, it's the one in downtown. Near that one big street with the big store near it? And that's all the detail they got. Nothing else, because they didn't have a number or reference. Clark County is going to have about 120 ballot drop boxes. So that creates a bit of a panic as you're trying to figure out which one they're talking about. Were they all full? Did we fill all of them? Is there, we empty them at a certain time and rate, but did we miss something? So by having a unique identifier, it helps facilitate that sort of reporting by the public. A county seal. There are areas where, again, multiple counties butt up against each other in a kind of a close fashion. Right here in Carson City is a great example, right? Many people live in Douglas and then work in Carson City like I do. Others in Washoe to Carson, Story, Lyon. And so as a result, by having county-specific seals on the ballot drop boxes, it's going to further reduce the confusion by somebody that places a ballot into a mail ballot into a drop box, not realizing that it's not their county and it's not the right location. There's a reporting requirement about the purchase, installing, and maintenance not later than 45 days after the general election. Again, going back to the idea that we need to be aware that this is going to change, or the nature of our elections will continue to change for the next couple of years going forward as we work through this process and continue to identify means to improve. These costs, the purchase and installation and maintenance, are extremely important factors that we have to look at to make sure that we're able to incorporate into the county and state budgets to address appropriately. But we've heard concerns about some maintenance issues in states with very rural areas. Unfortunately, some of their ballot drop boxes, not during an election per se, but in the off season, and having grown up in a rural spot myself, I'm familiar with this. They tend to develop, bullet-shaped holes in the off season. If you're not careful, being mindful of that, checking to make sure that if there are holes in your ballot drop boxes, they are maintained properly and fixed before the election cycle so that there's no chance of rain or snow getting in there as well. And that way, by tracking that again deliberately, we'll have better metrics to provide to the legislature during the session. Guidance on ballot delivered to the wrong clerk. This was something we saw in 20 and also something that was reiterated in our discussions with other states. And thankfully has now been clarified with the regulation. We've stated that there's going to be county-specific colored ballot return envelopes required after January of 2024. Between now and then, the counties are able to. The idea being that if you're here in Carson City, your ballot return envelope will be a certain color, green maybe. But if you live in Washoe, it will be a different color, perhaps purple. And so that way, when the clerks are going through the process of receiving mail ballots, it's going to make it even faster to identify, wait a minute, this is purple, this belongs in Washoe and not here in Carson City, so that we can expedite the return of that ballot to the appropriate clerk and have it counted in a timely manner. There's standards and testing and standards required now with signature verification machines. This is something that currently Clark County is the only county that has a signature verification machine. But this is something that other counties have been talking about pursuing, depending on the level of involvement and use of the mail ballot processes, not necessarily this year or even next, but possibly in the next 5 to 10 years. We thought if there's going to be a signature verification machine involved in our elections, then we need to clarify so that everyone's on the same page what those standards look like for testing and other standards. We talked about meaningful observation. There are a number of individuals who wanted, it was expressed during these regulatory discussions, unfettered access to the clerk's offices to be able to walk around and observe everything that occurs during the conduct of an election. The clerks, on the other hand, had said, well, we got concerns about that. We want the public to see, we want transparency, we're fans of transparency. But if I've got 50 people walking around my office and there's only 3 of us in here, we're not going to be able to do our work. And there's a better chance that something might get disrupted before the election. So we discussed and defined what meaningful observation looks like. That's one in particular that I suspect after the 22 election cycle, we're going to be very critical about possibly proposing changes to, or maybe modifying. We've increased our Department of Corrections collaboration. It was a little bit ad hoc before, depending on the county and the level of involvement from their local Department of Corrections officials. But this is now a very similar process to what we were doing with vital records, where the Department of Corrections in the next month or 2 will be sending us a list of individuals who have been convicted and incarcerated. So the clerks know who to actually remove and cancel the voter registration of pursuant to our statutes. That will also help clarify and further keep our rolls clean. Excuse me. That will also enable us, again, we're working towards it, a goal of when individuals are released as well, having the Department of Corrections notify us about that as well, which will then expedite the response at the county level, so that if someone says, wait a minute, my neighbor was incarcerated, he shouldn't be getting a mail ballot, the clerk will be able to say, oh, wait, you were notified he was released. He's no longer on, he meets the requirements to be an eligible voter again. So that way, again, that turnaround time will help hopefully reduce some of the confusion and workload of the county election officials. We clarified the timeline for written challenges pursuant to NRS 293-547. It was a little bit vague, and there was some level of confusion about, well, it says, the time period is 25 to 35 days before the election. Well, does that mean before the start of early voting, or does that mean before election day? We talked about it with our legal team. And interestingly enough, it was determined that based on the statutes and a number of other factors, that in fact, it referred specifically to election day, which then clarified, and we now have it as a clear series of dates in May, that the clerks will be able to receive and address written challenges pursuant to 293-547. And then risk limiting audits. Again, this is something that's still relatively new. You'll remember that we're doing pilots of risk limiting audits still, but we drafted some initial regulations to define how they look, what they're going to, how they're going to be run at the county and state level over this period of time as we move towards the full implementation starting in January of 2024. And now you may have noticed that I made reference to this in a couple different cases, but ultimately, while these regulations are truly again, the work of roughly 14 months of collaboration and lengthy discussion and review, we are ultimately kind of keeping in mind that some of them we may want to change. And we've realized what I'm getting at is that going forward, we are planning on having this regulatory type review be a biennial process. The idea being in January of an odd numbered year, and I don't mean odd year as in like 2020 was an odd year. Like, I mean, like an odd numbered year, January of 2020, after an election cycle, we're going to begin this same type of regulatory review. Start to finish, top to bottom, all of our regulations. What's changed? What should change based on our experiences in the previous year's election cycle and in discussions with the clerks and registrars. We'll go through the legislative session. What also needs to change because of those changes to the legislature or from the legislature. We'll continue the process, review it, and then again, by systematically doing this every other year, it's going to ensure that the regulations that we do have are as accurate and as useful as they can be. It's going to enable us to have specific touch points and times when the clerks and registrars can bring their concerns to the Secretary of State and say, these two regulations were great. We're kind of bracketing like it was here and now we're over here. Maybe just need to refine it a bit to make it more accurate or more helpful for the public or better for the clerks in understanding their requirements. And also, again, an added bonus is by having these in a consistent manner, the public will get involved. We had a number of individuals, approximately 50 or so, involved in our workshops and adoption hearings, which was great. We did it via Zoom specifically to enable folks from across the state to be involved, and many were. We had people calling in from all over the state, in fact, not just in Carson City and Las Vegas. So continuing that, where we offer it, again, routinely, in specific windows, making sure that the public is aware so they can be involved as well. and adjusting our timeline for implementation closer to October of 23, so that we have a little bit more of a buffer to prepare and make sure that everything is implemented prior to the start of the election cycle.
So Mark, I'm going to give you a chance to take a deep breath and get a drink of water. I had, after you went through all the process of doing the regulations and then you were getting ready to go to legislative commission, some people contacted me and they're like, that Mark Voloshin, he's changing the law. You got to do something about it. He's changing the law. And it was because they didn't understand the difference between law and regulation. And I'm like, no, the regulation's the way you implement the law to make sure it's uniform across the state. Was that the best way to explain that?
Yes, ma'am, and that's spot on. And I did notice that, to an extent, there were a handful of individuals who called into our regulation workshops and adoption hearings that expressed similar confusion. But again, really, I viewed it, and so did the rest of the team, and even our Deputy Attorney General friends who were involved, as an education opportunity. So when people said, wait a minute, I think, can you even do this? Yeah, absolutely. Like, we're not making this up as we go. Here are the statutes. Again, by doing it via Zoom, right? There was a lot of, hold on a sec, let me copy, paste this into the chat. I just put the link to the statute that talks about this regulation or that ability to create regulation, or here's this chapter or that one. But you're exactly right. At the end of the day, regulations aren't able to conflict with statutes, and that was something that we had to clarify during this process.
And Mark, I really was trying to figure out where I needed to ask this, and I think this is probably the best place. First of all, congratulations to you and your staff. I don't know if you saw the recent MIT election integrity report that came out. Nevada was ranked 13th in the nation, down a little bit from 2016, but even so, I think that says a lot. So congratulations to you and your staff. But the question really, what can be done next legislative session? And regretfully, we'll have a new Secretary of State. Right now we have a few counties going rogue. What can be done from the legislative standpoint to maybe tighten up the state regulation, to not allow the counties to go off on a completely different tangent? Or is there anything more legislatively that can be done under Dillon's rule and everything next session?
That's a very interesting question. And I suspect you're not going to like my answer. But the simple fact of the matter is, right, like I tell some of my staff, at the end of the day, we don't have opinions on Title 24. We execute and enforce to support the Secretary's statutory requirements. If there are legislators that propose different changes to the Title 24 laws, okay, and then we'll enforce and enact those as well. If there are questions that individuals, legislators and others have for us about, the boundaries, I'll explain what the laws state. But in regards to options like that, I really don't have much of an opinion. I'm sorry.
Understand and respect your answer. Thank you.
So I talked about this briefly, but again, just to reiterate, this regulatory review, the plan is to have it on a biennial basis going forward. Talked about odd years, though it does seem increasingly like every year is odd nowadays, but we'll work through that. Perfect. Okay, so what you're thinking though, and based on that, well, geez, Mark, I bet you have some thoughts already on some possible regulations. This comes up an interesting amount. Again, thankfully, the staff we have here in the elections division, really across the office of the Secretary of State, truly some amazing Americans and great Nevadans who are all committed collectively to doing and supporting the same process, the idea of continuous improvement and how can we make things better. And so our list for proposed regulations that we will consider and start talking about in January of 23 is not small. It's lengthy. Some of these already include and are not limited to some further discussion about reporting requirements, right? We want it so that when there is a reporting requirement from the county officials to the state, we want to immediately turn around and put that onto, for example, the website, so that the public, again, going back to transparency, we want the public to be able to see the same documents. When a clerk submits something, be it an observation plan or something that again, talks about how they're planning on conducting the election. Again, there's merit to the public seeing these documents. Of course, cybersecurity related things, and we'll touch on that here in a moment, aren't appropriate to put out there. We're not going to discuss our defensive plan, so to speak, but we do want to continue and really to codify that transfer of information from the clerks to the Office of the Secretary of State, and then make it instantly available to the public so they can continue to see this. The risk limiting audit process, it's going to continue developing as well as we work through the pilots during the 22 cycle, and we continue to gain lessons learned. There's a number of things that we've already identified and continue to refine, and we'll continue to do so further going into 23 in preparation for the 2024 election. And our first presidential preference primary coming up on February 6th of 2024, which is the next one. Assembly Bill 126. We have already identified a number of regulations and that will help implement Assembly Bill 126. Little known fact, we actually have had a presidential preference primary here as recently as 1996. So we're looking closely at some of those historic documents and what those regulations look like. A lot of changes between 96 and now. I think we can all agree. But again, the idea is that we're thinking about what will we need to have in place prior to the implementation of Assembly Bill 126 and that additional election in February of 2024 to make sure that election goes off as smoothly as possible. And then lastly, we've been talking about, and fairly applicable in the recent discussions going on, about hand count procedures. There's a lot of discussion in various counties about hand count procedures. And so we've conducted some research, and I thought this would be a good one to kind of expound upon, just to explain a little bit more. So what's being discussed at the county level, and even in our discussions with the clerks as recently as a couple hours ago, that some clerks have said that there's discussion about the elimination of the use of mechanical devices for elections, and that's for voting and for tabulation. This is something that again, there's concerns about for a number of reasons related, again, specifically to the statutory timelines. Nye, Elko, Lyon, there are others. It's being discussed in Washoe County as we speak, in fact. But this is an ongoing discussion, and not just in our state or even in the county, but at a national level, as a kind of collective discussion about election integrity and voter security and these sorts of things. So why would we think about regulations? What would that look like? Well, thinking about it again, not at a national level, right? Because, well, I'm a proud American, like we all are. Like at the end of the day, I'm focused on Nevada elections. So as we've discussed these processes and we've reached out to other states, there are other jurisdictions across the country that do something very similar. In most cases, these are jurisdictions that maybe have 2,200 voters total that have proudly not used mechanical voting devices for either voting or for tabulation. But there are some other states and jurisdictions that use hand counts as a means of a post-election audit. So while the counties right now, as you can imagine, your county clerks and registrars are focused on preparing for the primary, going through candidate filing, addressing candidate challenges and the numerous other things that are required, ballot styles and redistricting and finalizing everything else related to that. And again, even the counties that we have newly appointed or fairly recently appointed clerks who replaced the other elected officials who's resigned, there's a lot going on at the county level. So while the counties are focused there, we're looking long-term and have been asking questions about hand count regulations. What would that look like? We've talked to these jurisdictions and the election officials elsewhere who are proud of what they do and happy with what they do with hand count processes. And we ask them, well, tell us what you do, explain the best practice so that we can understand it, so that I'm aware of everything from, like, show me the format on your page. Can we share a screen and you can hold it up and say, this is what it looks like and how many boxes we use, and here's how many people, and here are the planning factors we use. This is how big the space is that you'll need, and here's how many, this is how many ballots we use and how many races are on those ballots, and it takes roughly this long. Like those sorts of planning factors that have helped shape some draft regulations Because if this comes to pass where we have counties in Nevada that transition to or pursue or even are interested in pursuing hand counts, we want to be able to say, one, there's a best practice out there. You don't have to create the wheel by yourself. We're going to look and discuss with you what that would look like. Standardization, right? It's imperative, and it's tied in specifically also to something that we have in our Constitution now with our voter rights, the ability to have a uniform counting process across the state, so that it's not one county doing it one way or another county doing it a different way, or trying to make something up on the fly because of a last minute change. So that standardization will be extremely important as well. And that ties into the concerns about the timeliness of these processes, right? Like at the end of the day, we covered, there's a requirement for the county commissioners to canvass within no later than 10 days after election day. Well, what's that look like if a large jurisdiction or a large county isn't able to get there? How do we help ensure success at the county level? How do we make sure that that these discussions that are ongoing, they're aware that when somebody comes from out of town maybe and says hand counts are easy, you can do them, everyone should do them down to the precinct level. How do they know what's good and best for Nevada and what Nevadans need based on our timelines and our statutes? So that's an example of some of the ideas of regulations that we're looking at considering to make sure, again, at the end of the day, every eligible voter should be able to cast a ballot. The legal ballots will be counted. In this process, this discussion, while there's certainly some concerns, and there's also a very deliberate reason why we use mechanical voting devices. And if anybody's interested in talking about the history of, starting with, well, I don't know, like the 1948 Senate race in Texas, the primary, where Lyndon Johnson won by his team deliberately stuffed ballot boxes, and all these different things that occurred back then, and then to the 60s where it wasn't much better, and to the 70s where it only got a little bit better, and through even to the 80s where it kind of got a little bit better, and all the changes to everything from the Voting Rights Act to the National Voter Registration Act to the Help America Vote Act, all these different processes that were built upon learning the lessons from before and improving our electoral processes to make sure that legal ballots counted, and that we were able to process these in a timely manner. The progress that we're making, again, while there's certainly some questions about the direction we're headed, the goal is at the end of the day to make sure that Nevada elections continue to have a high standard that we know and are familiar with. Questions on that? No? Okay. All right. So 2022 primary dates. I do want to highlight real fast a handful of dates. We talked about candidate filing. Again, there's the link that you'll see, and I basically try to incorporate just about every conversation I have. I think even by this point, my wife and children are familiar with it. A little bit of statistics on the number of individuals who have identified that they're, again, running as a representative of a major party. Of course, if you see the number 1, those individuals will not be on the primary. Those will be getting moved directly to the general. But I did want to highlight the kind of large numbers of interest that we've gotten in offices across the state. And these are the individuals that filed here with the Office of the Secretary of State, which of course are statewide offices or multi-county offices as well. And you'll notice those are also, the full list is also at the link provided there at the top of the page.
So I have one question that I need to make sure I ask, because I just got texted from someone who said, make sure you ask this question. Are we going to still get sample ballots? So
Yes,
we'll get a mail-in ballot and a sample ballot.
That is correct. If
Okay.
you want to not receive a sample ballot, there's an opt-out process, but that is a separate opt-out process than the opting out of the mail ballots. But yes,
Right.
ma'am.
So
Sample ballot.
on a sample ballot, we can still say, send it to me electronically.
Yes, that's
Okay.
correct.
Okay,
Excellent point.
perfect. Thank you.
And Sandra, this is Barbara. I get mine that way. I asked them when they first came out with it, I thought it was a great idea to save the Clark County money.
Yep.
And sending out that paper just to put it on the ballot. So, or
Yep.
on the computer. So it works out really well. And that's where I've been able to do it. And I can print it out if I want to.
Yep, that's what we do at the Cosgrove household too. And then that way it's on your phone when you go in to vote and you can just
Yeah.
kind of flip through it. Yep, I like it too. So
Yeah, I do that too. The only difference is you don't have the barcode. on the sample ballot that they can scan when you check in, but that's the only difference. But no, I went there, same thing as the secretary, as soon as they did that.
So Chairwoman, this is Kathy McAdoo. May I ask a question?
Absolutely, absolutely.
So is there a white paper or a media release that I live in Elko that could go to, I would say all the counties, but is there something that I could have to release that information of signing up for the sample ballots electronically where I live, or do you already do that and I just have not seen it?
Yes, ma'am. I can, I'll get that information to you as soon as we're done, if it's okay.
Okay.
And absolutely. You know, there is a number of things that we try really hard to kind of get the word out about. But nowadays, especially with social media being what it is, it's awfully hard to compete with a number of other voices. We'll say,
Right.
you know, just in general with the news and everything going on.
Well, you have and I realize you have a very limited budget, just like every other state agency. However, I will be at an event this weekend and I have access to distributing that at other things that I could go to, that maybe it would generate some people to sign up for that, because then that does help enhance the county's budget, because it's very expensive. The elections are expensive.
Yeah.
Yes,
Yeah.
ma'am.
Thank you.
Absolutely.
So
I appreciate-
I'm actually going to try and do a one pager that's a PDF, a JPEG, and something that can be emailed around through my Vote Nevada group.
Okay.
So I can send that to you, Kathy, by this weekend.
Okay, I'll take both and make good use of them. Thank
Awesome.
you.
Perfect. So here's a handful of dates that I do want to highlight leading up to the primary. Again, these are incidentally pulled off of, oh geez, there's the link again. Man, it's almost like I'm encouraging you guys to go there to check stuff out. We have just posted recently the elections. There's a calendar. There's actually two forms of the calendar that we have on there as well now. One's basically an 8.5 by 11 series of about a dozen pages, and the other, there are two suitable for framing wall calendars as well. One for the primary, one for the general election, that are pretty helpful. But those are on here. And again, I wanted to highlight some of these dates. So in particular, we talked about the opt-out process and receiving a mail ballot. Again, that is April 15th, no later than April 15th. And again, you can do that online. You can print out the form and mail it in. You can even go into your clerk and registrar's office, and they've got a stack of them there that you can talk to them and opt out if you don't want to receive a mail ballot that way. When it comes to the mail ballots being sent out, there's a federal requirement at the county level for them to send out their UOCAVA, which is the Uniformed and Overseas Citizen Absentee Voting Act. So military and overseas citizens, those individuals need to have their ballot sent no later than 45 days before an election. In fact, we have a reporting requirement 43 days before the election to notify the federal government about the compliance at the county level about that. So those mail ballots will be sent out no later than 45 days. That's when the effective absentee system for elections, or EASE, is turned on. That's when the website will go live, so that again, concurrently military and overseas individuals will be able to cast the ballot. And now, courtesy of Assembly Bill 121, members of the disabled community as well. And that's April 30th. All other mail ballots, again, there was an interesting discussion that we had about when is the sweet spot for a county to send out mail ballots. On the one hand, again, is the third bullet there, that they are required to send out ballots up to the 14th day before the election for individuals who update or are new registrants. But there was an interesting discussion. On the one hand, right, you might think, well, if they're going to mail out military and overseas about 46 days before the election or so, why not just send them all? We've realized that in part, and probably not for this audience today, but there's a number of folks that maybe just aren't aware or don't really kind of think about the election per se until you're within about 30 days or so, or maybe less than 45 before the election. Those individuals will kind of hear about it in the news as it starts to get closer and closer, and then we'll go in and update their voter registration somewhere between 45 and about 20 days. And so the risk is, if a county official sends out ballots 47 days, there's going to be a larger percentage that gets sent back as being undeliverable because those individuals have not yet had the chance to update their voter registration. As it gets closer, people will think, oh, I need to update my registration. I forgot to let the clerk know that I moved from one side of town to the other. They'll go online, they'll update it, and that's going to help, again, keep our lists more clean, as well as making sure that the ballots go to people and don't get kicked back. So there's kind of a sweet spot between 45 and about 30 days before the election. But again, as we get those dates from the counties, we will post that on the link at the bottom of the screen.
Yeah, Mark.
Yes, sir.
Yeah, Mark, how are the AB 121 eligible people being notified that they can make use of these?
There's a couple ways, really. We've attempted a level of voter outreach to a number of advocacy groups. There are a greater number of advocacy groups that we're watching very closely during the legislative session. Those individuals have also been reaching out and talking to individuals across the state. And if I remember right, one of the advocate groups said somewhere around 1 in 6 Nevada voters would be eligible to use ease, more or less. So I know it's a great number of folks. And there's a large number of organizations and individuals that are advocating for and trying to spread the word. I suspect it'll always be a bit of a moving target, right, given how transient our state is. And that's probably the case with all outreach, that even the outreach we've been doing in the last 6 or so months, there's someone I'm sure who's just moved to town today, right, that missed all of that. So it will be an ongoing challenge and an ongoing effort to really let the right people know. But that's something that we've been working on and taking very seriously.
Well, if the advocacy groups are doing it, that's probably the most effective way. So that's a good thing.
Sure. The mail ballots. Talk about the period for written challenges. Again, that'll be May 15th to May 20th. And this is an interesting thing too, that I think it also helps to be aware of. That it was highlighted to an extent during our discussions with other states that have vote by mail. One of the challenges we said is, there's been a lot of discussion about voter registration lists. How do we keep them clean? And it's interesting that certain states consider the vote by mail process to be the most effective way to truly keep your voter lists clean. And this is why, again, not saying I agree or disagree, but here was kind of their point of view. If you think, even just a couple of years ago in the 2016 election, right, we had a no excuse absent ballot process. Anyone could request an absent ballot, but you had to proactively reach out and ask for that absent ballot. It would get sent to you, you could fill it out. Everybody else that was an active registered voter, again, would vote in person, either early voting or on election day. But there wasn't a requirement, of course, to vote. So you could be an active registered voter and not have voted for 10 years or longer. All right, there's no requirement in federal or state law for that to occur. But when you have, and so as a result, there may have been individuals who are active registered voters who either moved or weren't in the state, or maybe for whatever reason were no longer eligible voters, that just nobody knew about because they didn't vote, but there was no real way, like they were on a list. If they showed up in person, they could vote. And then later with SDR, like that would have been fine too. But again, they not necessarily slipped under the radar, but they were just active registered voters that there was no way to necessarily confirm. But now, because we're sending a mail ballot to every active registered voter in the state, there's going to be positive confirmation of each one of those individuals during all future election cycles. Again, county level recalls, county special elections for a ballot question about, like how Elko had a tax question recently. Like every one of these types of elections is going to be a de facto validation of our active registered voter list. Ballots will be sent out. If somebody gets a ballot and says, hey, this guy doesn't live here anymore, he moved just like a couple of weeks ago, we're going to find that out much faster than we would have before. So there's going to be this kind of spike, a period of time, probably through at least the 24 election cycle, where more people are saying, wait a minute, this person doesn't live in my residence anymore, or those sorts of discussions. But as time goes on, the lists will continue to get cleaner. We are, again, a very transient state. And I keep stressing that because that's an important factor. It will never be perfect, right? Again, unfortunately, during this conversation, somebody has passed away. Somebody else has decided to move back to Kansas or something after the roulette wheel didn't quite work out for them or something, right? So these sorts of changes, the people coming and going, will always continue. But by sending out a mail ballot, that's going to increase the validity and cleanliness of our voter registration rolls. So that when we talk about the period for written challenges, when a lot of individuals are planning on bringing to their clerks a form that says, I want to challenge somebody's ability to vote, their eligibility, because they were in my house, but they've moved. Again, those sorts of processes where we send out ballots will slowly reduce the number of opportunities, frankly, for written challenges as the lists are cleaned up. Real fast, and the last thing on the mail ballot before we keep moving, I do want to mention again, if you or anybody else asks questions about how they can best help out, really the key thing when it comes to the mail ballots and really all official election mail is that if you receive something at your residence and it's not for you, it's for a previous tenant, the wrong thing to do is to destroy or throw away the ballot. The right thing to do, and a lot of folks just don't realize this still, so we're really trying to get the word out about this, is to write return to sender on that official election mail. Postcard, sample ballot, primary ballot, whatever it ends up being. If you write return to sender, that mail will go back to the clerk or registrar. They'll receive it. They'll send out a mail postcard notification. Hey, we got something back from this address, said you weren't there. If you are there, tell us. Please contact us. You've got 30 days. If they don't, after that postcard comes back, if they still don't reply, then the individual's voter registration gets inactivated. And that means that if you do that with a postcard notification or with a sample ballot during the primary, then they will not be on the active registered voter list, and that individual won't be getting a mail ballot sent to that same address in future elections. Again, that will clean up our voter rolls so much. So I did want to stress that. Other dates of importance, again, early voting, May 28th through June 10th. Election day, of course, is the 14th. We talked a little bit about the timelines afterwards in regards to recounts and some, contesting elections. And then lastly, if you're really, and again, if you're on this call today, that I include you in my group of election nerds. I encourage you to go to the 2022 elections link there to check out the calendars we have available as well. They're great one-stop kind of points for understanding what steps in the process your clerks and registrars are working on. And it is amazing to see when you see it all in one list of all of the statutory and regulatory requirements. Holy cannoli! You realize that election workers don't just think, okay, June 14th and then probably like a day in November. Like it's a year-round process, truly a mountain of work that your election officials do at the state and local levels. A couple other things I want to talk about specifically to the way forward. Again, we talked about the regulations. We talked about some of the changes. We are going to be very keen in our data collection through the 2022 primary and general elections. We've asked the clerks and registrars to, as they come across something that they think, oh man, this would be a great idea for regulation, or that reg's, yeah, kind of good, but maybe if we tweak this word or that word, it would improve. Statistics, a lot of statistics, so that we can bring those to the legislative session in 23 and present to the legislators. Here's how things have gone. Here's what changes are. Again, tangible numbers, not just things are harder or easier or better or worse, nothing like that. Just the facts. That's the important part that we provide so that they can make decisions based on factual information and not guesses or emotion. We talked about Assembly Bill 126, the presidential preference primary. And that's going to continue as we discuss and prepare for that again on February 6th of 2024. Again, that'll be a very important date in our state's history, and we want to make sure that as we lean towards and prepare for that election, we're doing everything we can to be ready for it. Talked about the regulatory review that starts in January 23, as well as the legislative session coming up here before we know it in less than a year as well. So again, we are very conscious, and something that I talk about with the election division pretty regularly is that there's a lot going on. There's a lot of statutory requirements, a lot of questions we get from the public, from clerks, preparations, discussions about candidates and challenges and all these sorts of things. But we got to be thinking long term. We got to be thinking about what's not just the nearest alligator to the boat, so to speak, but what are we as a division doing to support the needs of our Nevada electorate? How are we thinking long term? Well, there's a session coming up in 23. Are we aware of the metrics we're going to gather? Have we talked to the clerks about those metrics? Have we discussed how we're going to gather it? Who's collecting? Who's primary on different things? What lessons learned have we learned from 20 and 21 that we're codifying internally to make sure that as we move forward and have in truth, some staff members get promoted and moved into other divisions or into other agencies. How are we capturing their roles and responsibilities here in the elections division so that somebody else can show up and immediately read this and you'll be ready faster than you would have been otherwise? Truly, we've had one employee that she joined us right before candidate filing. And ultimately, it was about 2-3 weeks before candidate filing, and she was one of the primaries on candidate filing. That was a great example where we were prepared, we provided information to her, we had some discussions. This is the immediate need, here's what's going on, here's some discussion points, lessons learned from before. And she knocked it out of the park and did an incredible job stepping right into that position. We have to be aware at the elections level, elections division, just no different than any other state agency or really any company across the state. There's going to be continued turnover. We got to mentally prepare for that and make sure that we have the right documents in place to support, again, maintaining a high level of quality in elections administration without risking anything kind of going by the wayside as people celebrate promotions and move on, and those sorts of things. Continued outreach efforts, definitely a key point. We want to continue to get the word out, talking to people, small groups, across the board, answering questions and trying to address voter needs where they're at with again, not, anything opinionated. Just imagine this, factual information presented in a non-biased manner. Imagine that, like from this Office of the Secretary of State. We're going to continue doing that and offering it, just the facts. So we're going to continue identifying ways to improve upon that, including, and I realized I wanted to put this on here, so I threw this on here just late last night. Before we meet again, the Helen J. Stewart Award submissions will be due April 29th. Another great example of outreach, right? I've been reaching out. I reached out to the 17 school boards and tried to talk to a number of them. I have since started reaching out as reminders to the various superintendents to remind them about this timeline and the submission packet. That link there at the bottom of the page takes you to the form, explains the requirements, all of these sorts of things. I know we had one high school apply for it in 2020, but we got about 217 high schools in Nevada, according to Google. I'm certainly hoping that we can inch our way closer to maybe double digits, maybe triple. That's almost I shouldn't even say it out loud. That's maybe a dream come true if we could get that level of outreach going, so that our soon-to-be and newest population of voters were aware of the process and how to go online and register to vote. So that's something that we're continuing to try to get the word out as well about. And that being said, that's really the extent of the discussion. I do want to leave this slide up for a quick 3 count, and then I'll take it off if there's any additional questions. But please, as always, if you have any questions, if there's anything I can do to help or assist, please reach out to us here at the Elections Division. And we're always eager to get questions. Many times emails and phone calls will come to me directly, and again, more than willing to support the needs of anyone across the electorate, for sure. But otherwise, unless you have any questions for me, that's what I have right now.
Would you be willing to share your PowerPoint with me so I can make it into a PDF to post?
Yes, ma'am.
Awesome. Okay. Committee members, do you have any questions for Mark?
Yes, I do. This is Barbara Sagaski,
Yeah.
Secretary of State. Mark, could you talk just for a second about the myths and facts that we have up on the website as well, and where they can find that?
Yes, ma'am. Absolutely. So that, and I apologize for not catching that earlier. So we, as many of you know, during the 2020 election cycle, there was a primary, a general version, and then a post-general election version of a myths versus fact document that we had on the website for the Office of the Secretary of State. Those documents are still on the page, and I'll track down the link and be able to provide it to you, Dr. Cosgrove. But in addition to the ones from the 2020 election cycle, which again, imagine that, like, the facts haven't changed, like the law is the law. But we are working on a new version as well to address a number of interesting things we've heard. Again, just putting out, here's what the truth is, so that everyone is able to find it. We will have that up here shortly, probably before the primary election, certainly before the primary election, rather, on the top of the nbsos.gov webpage, right at there's the red bar across the top. We'll have that front and center and easily findable. So again, between the 2022 election information page and then having that myths versus facts, again, if you hear questions too, please reach out and let me know. We'll research and put the truth out there, again, in a very simple, again, non-biased, fact-based sort of way to address any sorts of information that maybe seems a bit off. Thank you for the question, Secretary.
Madam Chair, if I might, one more thing.
Absolutely.
Thank you. You talked about a wall calendar. Is that online that anybody can see that calendar about the dates and the times? I know we used to have one that was printed, but did we just put one on the website? And again, thank you for your presentation, everything that you were able to talk about. And I know there's a lot more, but thank you, Mark.
Yes, ma'am. And to answer the question directly, yes. In the last, I don't think it's been the last 3 or 4 days, the county clerks and registrars, we have the calendar finalized. They decided or I'm sorry, we sent it to the printer because of the additions from the 2021 legislative session. It actually is too big for one calendar. It used to be a collective primary and then rolled right into the general election. Now it ended up being 2 pages. In our discussion with the printers, the vendor said if you print it on front and back, you can't read either side of it. But then the clerks and registrars asked, they said, you know, can we print it out like a smaller version? If you put it up, and a couple members of the public asked about it as well. So in the last day or two, we provided the PDF of that on the website as well. Both the wall calendar version as well as a smaller version that had been historically added into some of our election guides. Again, just so that one of them is easier to print. If you print the wall calendar out on 8.5 by 11, I would be impressed if anyone could read it. But the other version we have is on there as well. Yes, ma'am.
Thank you. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Absolutely. Anyone else?
Yes, Chairwoman, this is Kathy McAdoo.
Absolutely. Go ahead with your question.
Oh, it's really just a comment. I wanted to thank Mark for all his work with this presentation. I just really like getting this factual, correct information so that when I disperse it, I know that it's correct. So thanks for all your work on that. And then lastly, I wanted to know if you could give me your phone number that I could call you if I had further questions. Mark.
Yes, ma'am. Certainly.
Thank you.
If you're all right with it, I could maybe do it after the fact.
Yeah, you can send it when you send me the other things. Would that work?
Excellent. Yes, ma'am.
Thanks so
I will
much.
eagerly do
Appreciate
that.
it. Okay.
All right. Anyone else? Okay. I'm going to also thank Mark because I know that was a ton of information. But it's so important because there's so many things that are changing. Even the little changes can get confusing. And so I really appreciate the fact that you're here right now giving this presentation. But now it's going to be so much easier for the rest of us when somebody's like, no, I heard this story. And you're like, hold on a minute. I'm going to pull Mark up on my phone and you're going to listen to him. There you go. There's Mark. So this is going to make my life so much easier. So I really appreciate that. And anybody that's watching right now, this will be on the Facebook page as a recording. So even though we're doing it live right now, as soon as we're finished, it will save on the Facebook page as a recording and you can go back and look at it. So hugely, hugely helpful. Really appreciate it.
Well, I do appreciate all of your comments. And again, truth be told, right, like we're a very strong team. I don't do anything by myself. The election division is made up of some incredible, incredible people. Again, be wrong of me to name one because I'd miss the others that are equally supportive. And again, ultimately, you know, thankful to the Secretary of State for allowing us to work in this division and to support the needs of the electorate. So again, under her guidance and tutelage, all of that made all of this possible. So I will pass on your comments to my team. I do appreciate that. And again, thank you, Secretary, for allowing us the honor of being here today.
All right.
Mark.
So we're going to go ahead. I'm going to actually go over, I'm going to do a screen share because we're going to go over to the agenda. But just because Mark said it enough times, I'm going to go to the Secretary of State's website, go to elections, and there it is right there. Ta-da! It's awesome. There it is. And then Mark, it's up here that you're going to put the myths and facts up in this red bar, correct?
That's correct. Yes, ma'am.
Okay. Okay. All right. Perfect. Okay. So we are now over to agenda item number 9, report on convening of elections integrity task force on primary election day. And that is the secretary. So Secretary Sagafsky.
Well, thank you. And I do want to thank Doug for his kind comments. Thank you, Doug. And thank Mark again for his presentation. He always does a great job and we're very proud of all of our deputies and elections gets hit the hardest, I think. So we're really grateful for that. I do want to first start out by saying that my predecessor is the one that started the Election Integrity Task Force. And but we've enhanced it, and we have it for the primary and the general. We do both. So for the upcoming primary election, I'll be convening the Election Integrity Task Force, or we refer to it as EITF, just an abbreviation, which everybody loves. But the EITF is a multiple jurisdictional partnership created by the Office of Nevada Secretary of State in 2008. And it was to target and deal with or eliminate election issues, voter intimidation, and other election-related violations. That was its main purpose. It includes members of my team, along with representatives from the Nevada Attorney General's Office, the FBI, Federal Bureau of Investigation, the U.S. Attorney General, Metro, North Las Vegas, school police, and other various local law enforcement agencies. So we get a little bit of everything and work well together. We take phone calls from concerns. We also have each party, the Republicans and Democrats, each send a representative. And we ask that if they hear anything or know anything to let us know, so we know which jurisdiction we can send to look at that issue. The group meets in the Secretary of State's office in my North Las Vegas house on the 4th floor. And we have election day that starts at 7, and then we don't go out until the polls close. So that can be a long night. And then my office and the EITF members closely monitor election activities and investigate complaints that come in from all over Nevada. I mean, we have 17 counties, and we have a lot going on, as you can well tell from Mark's presentation. And since its formation, the EITF has investigated several cases of election abuse, and along with the AG's office has successfully prosecuted groups and individuals who have violated election law. Now, the numbers that have been suggested, that is not factual, but we do have election issues. We do have people that double vote. Sometimes we find out it's a junior and senior. We have people that vote for others that we find out about. We have people that fraudulently collect people's forms and may not turn them in correctly. So we do have issues, and we have people that try to get away with things, as we do in every agency in the state. Unfortunately, there are some people out there that try to get away with issues. And so we want you to know that we work really hard in our securities division, which we have 8 divisions in the Secretary of State's office. We have the criminal investigators, and they do look into issues that we find or that we hear about or that we look at just to find out if it's factual or not true. We've been able to do that, and we have some really good team players in our securities division. Those criminal investigators do a great job. And then working with the AG's offices has been good for us. And then working with Metro, working with also the DA's office, the district attorney's office, depending on what the issue is and if we need any help. So we have avenues. We have had, count on a couple hands, the number of issues that we do have, but we do have some serious issues, and we do look into every complaint that we get. So with that, thank you very much for having me, and I really appreciate it.
Thank you. And before we go to our last agenda item, I just want to say how much I have appreciated working with you, Secretary Sagowski. This is going to be your last year. You're termed out, so we'll have a new Secretary of State, and I'm sure that person will also be a proud Nevadan, and we'll work with that person. But I just wanted to say how much I've appreciated working with you. You have a backbone of steel, and I've always appreciated that. And I've always considered you to be a good friend. And so I just wanted to let you know how much I do appreciate you.
Thank you. I really appreciate those comments. Thank you very much.
And I would like to echo those as well. From the first time we met, probably 8 years ago, almost 8 years ago. So I too really have it's been an honor working with you. So thank you.
Deb. Thank you, Sandra. I really appreciate it. Thank you very much.
And this is Kathy McAdoo, and I would say ditto to those comments, and just want to remark on your integrity. And I've told you before, but I will say it publicly, that I was privileged to work in the elections process at Elko County, and there was no fraud. I would never go so far as to say there might not have been a mistake, but I never saw any, I'll put it that way. And I attribute that to your leadership throughout the state of Nevada. So I'm very proud to know you. I'm very proud to call you friend and colleague.
Thank you, Kathy. I really appreciate that. We have some remarkable clerks throughout this state, and I want to commend them and thank them. Mark's done a great job with them, and thank you so much.
Okay, so now the last thing on our agenda, I'm going to go ahead. I'll just do a quick share screen so I make sure I read it off correctly. So we're on to agenda number item number 10, report on the implementation of Senate Bill 194 from the 2021 legislative session concerning the Seal of Civics program. And I am especially excited to hear about this. So it's going to be Janie Maloney that does the presentation. Janie?
Thanks, Sandra. Yeah, so SB 194 is essentially some legislation that was passed in 2021 that established multiple different programs for civics for K-12 students. So some big pieces are we now have a seal in civics. So we have that where students in the K-12 system essentially when they're a senior can be awarded that seal. The seal will then be on their diploma as well as then on their transcript. So it really does honor and show proficiency in what civics looks like. So that's one piece. Another piece is establishing different civics of excellence programs. So essentially student, educator, leader, and school. So it's actually what would those programs be and how can we honor some of our fellow Nevadans around our state in these areas. Another big piece to this bill in itself, and I have the bill up so I don't forget anything, is that requiring additional and acknowledging of different groups, if you will, that are, so we've widened essentially who it is that we serve and what groups that we actually work for. And so it really has elongated and explicitly pointed out that we will serve Indigenous populations, immigrants, refugees, LGBTQ, different Hispanic populations. So just to be explicit that we have many groups of people in our state and that we do serve them all and that nobody is to be excluded. So it really is about bringing diversity and inclusivity, which what a better way to do that is with civics. So where we're at with some civics, there's some big pieces in the civic seal as well as the civic excellence programs that we have to create additional criteria points. So some in the bill were laid out. So for example, in the seal, you are required to have a certain GPA that has been outlined already in the legislation itself. An element that's not been outlined that we are working on trying to be as explicit as possible is what does the idea of citizenship mean and look like, and how would we evaluate that in our classrooms? And so we are currently working, and so I have pulled together a task force, a group of different stakeholders, mostly with education to background, to help with this. And so we have stakeholders, educators, administrators, and some organizations that have some educational experience to help with this work. We meet actually every other Monday. It's a closed meeting, not an open meeting, and to really go through what this would look like. And so we have created actually what does citizenship mean in Nevada? And we have created a rubric. And so how will we evaluate that? We are currently then breaking down how, like what would be required to fulfill this citizenship score or evaluation. And when we mean citizenship, we mean, right, little c, not big C, right? So that's how I like to explain it, not if you're a citizen of Nevada. And one of the pieces that we're really trying to be intentional about is that we don't want to say that you have to have like only 4, like, so typically in high school, right, they have 8 semesters. We're not saying you need to have 8 semesters as satisfactory or above, because we really feel strongly that we should allow students to improve. So we want students to be able to do better. And so if we say 8 semesters, we're already locking them out of this opportunity. So we are having very thoughtful conversations about what that would look like and what to include, because we don't want this just to be like elite of all students, but we want all students to be able to participate, because it doesn't matter how well and how high you score, right, in certain classes. To be civically aware and engaged is all of us. Right? No matter if you are academically, you know, a straight A student or a C student, or you struggle at first and then you get better. And so we definitely want to ensure that we are being very inclusive of all of our students across the state. Another piece of the seal itself is service learning. So in order to receive the seal, you have to have actually done a service learning project. And so we are actually creating what that will look like, how students can go, or how schools can go about enacting those service learning projects, building what we're calling a menu, like a menu board of what those projects could be. Because we don't believe, and we mean the civic advisory panel, that we should tell a student what they have to believe in. They should be able to tell us, but we want to give them the tools, right, and to know how to go about doing that. So if we have somebody who is an Eagle Scout, who is, you know, feels strongly about creating a garden, who am I to say no to that? And so we want to be able to give our students those opportunities to show how to work and improve their own community, and let them define what that actually community is. That might be their neighborhood, but it might just be their school. It might be the city they live in. Let's have them, you know, kind of work in those parameters. So we really are, again, being intentional with student voice in this too, because we know more student voice, you'll get more student buy-in. So those are the big pieces, I would say, with the seal that we are currently working on. When it comes to the excellence programs, now those will actually require regulations for the state of Nevada. And we haven't worked on those because we're still working on some of the parts of the seal. So that's our next up. We will actually think about the criteria points of what would be required for essentially the 3 groups to be awarded, right? The Nevada Excellence of Civics. So we're working that out. And so happy to give an update in our next meeting, because at our next meeting, we should actually have a full outline of what those criteria points would be.
Okay, well, I get that an official woohoo.
Janie, I sent you my email in the chat. I would really like to connect with you. I'm glad to hear that you've got something going to dig deeper into the civic seal. When that bill came up, I was the only person to testify in opposition. And I did so because reading the bill, it simply awarded a seal for the status quo. 3 hours of civics, which is required of anybody. 3.25 grade point average, but not in civics, just overall. The service project come 2027 is going to be mandatory for everybody. So I would really like to talk to you. So I sent you my email and possibly be part of the discussion on how the program is going to be enhanced and really value civics. So I sent you my email, and we can maybe chat more offline.
Sure, absolutely. I will say that the requirement for service learning was removed from the final bill. So service learning is actually not required for all students. It's only required if they want to participate in the SEAL program. And then one of the assessment aspects for civics is they do have to take the civics assessment that all students are required to take to graduate high school. They're not required to pass it, but they are required to take it. And this assessment is the exact questions of the civic portion of the USCIS test. Yeah, what is required for the SEAL, though, is they have to earn a 90% on that assessment. So whereas for all students, they just have to take it. For the seal, they are required to earn a 90%.
Yeah, I appreciate that. And there were comments I made in my written testimony. I'll send them to you if you could just give me yours. And again, I just really would appreciate talking to you more offline about this. I think it's a
Absolutely.
valuable program, but it
Yeah.
wasn't, I don't think it was passed. The bill itself, I don't think was adequate enough.
But it sounds like, Janie, it sounds like you've had some maybe regulation wiggle room so that you all are being able to craft it into something that's meaningful.
Yes, so a lot of the, I would say, direct stipulations that were in some of the original pieces of the bill were removed. So it gave a little bit more, I don't want to say flexibility, but it gave us some more ability to engage with stakeholders who had some additional insight on how we could actually make this meaningful programs for our students and educators actually around our state and what this could actually mean. So, right, versus just taking a test that's quite frankly, very basic, right? It's very much my phone can answer these questions, into turning it to something where we actually want students to be doing something. I can take an assessment and say, I understand the 3 branches of government. That's great. However, really to become civically engaged, you have to practice. You actually have to do it, do something. And so that was the piece that we're really trying to help our students and our educators, quite frankly, understand that we should be having them do something every day, and that we want to build civic awareness and engagement. And by doing this does require you to practice. And this could actually even stem from just engaging in civil discourse. Just talking with our fellow students and our fellow neighbors, and not saying I don't like you because we disagree. And so it really is, hopefully this will be the beginnings of some really great movements in progress in our state when it comes to how do we really engage civically with all of our stakeholders in Nevada.
That sounds that really sounds very interesting. And again, I look forward to talking more with you. Maybe you'll ease some of my concerns, or maybe some of the things that I'm thinking about you've already addressed or are planning to address. So again, I look forward to speaking more with you on that.
Absolutely. I'm emailing you right now, so you have my email.
Does anybody else have questions for Janie? Okay, not seeing any. I'm going to go back over to our agenda to make sure we're moving along. And so the next things we have on the agenda as we wrapped up is going to be proposed agenda items, and then a possible next meeting date and time. So apart from, possibly looking at having a meeting after the primary election, but before we get into the general election cycle, to make sure, we hear how do things work out in the primary and are we doing anything different in the general? Is there anything else anybody wanted to add as a possible future agenda item? Okay, because there's a lot of things that are a lot of moving parts and pieces to the changes for this election cycle. So do we think we want to maybe shoot towards like August or September like we did last year? Because we want to make sure we do the meeting before we get into they're mailing out ballots and everybody gets busy. So I know that's the reason we did August 2nd the last time, is August, there was a couple of weeks where the secretary and Mark and Gail had downtime. Does that look okay? I mean, obviously we'll coordinate with the secretary's calendar. Kathleen, are you okay with that? Okay. Okay. So right now for future agenda, we'll get an update on the primary election and all of the new changes that are going to go into effect, and then anything we need to know about the general election. And we will coordinate with through Gail to the secretary's calendar for sometime in August or September when everybody has some time. Is that okay? All right. Okay, so we took care of that pretty quickly. Before we do the last public comment, there is time for committee members. If you have anything last that you want to say, anything you'd like to say before we wrap up. Okay. All right. So now I'm going to go ahead and do a share screen again, because we're going to go into our last public comment. So I'm going to go ahead and scroll back up to the information that folks, where you can call, and then the meeting ID. If people would like to call in to do public comment, we'll take 2 minutes per person on public comment. And I'll leave that up for just a second so folks can see it if they'd like to do public comment. I don't see anybody, and I don't see anybody with comments on the Facebook page. So obviously, anybody in the public can contact Mark's office, can contact myself. I'm pretty easy to find as well. So what I need now is just a motion to adjourn.
This is Kathleen. I move to adjourn.
All right, in a
This is
second.
Kathy, I'll second.
All right, awesome. It's all in favor, say aye.
Aye.
All right,
Aye.
thank you, everybody. I really appreciate every single one of you.
Thank
Thank
you.
you.
All right, talk to you later.
Bye-bye.